It was a night like any other, a quiet neighborhood, a family at home. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. The kind of night where everything feels normal. But sometime in the early hours of the morning, while most people were still asleep, something happened that no one could have expected. A 9-year-old girl got out of bed, left her house, and walked into the darkness, alone. No one forced her. No one saw her leave. And to this day, no one fully understands why. This is the story of Asha Degree, a case that has remained one of the most mysterious disappearances in recent history. Welcome to True Crime Journals. If you're drawn to cases that make you question everything you thought you understood, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And before we get into it, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Now let's go back to that night, February 13th, 2000. Asha Degree was at home with her family in Shelby, North Carolina. It had been a normal day. She spent time with her family. She went about her usual routine. Nothing stood out as unusual. Later that evening, there had been a power outage caused by a storm. For a while, the house was without electricity, but eventually the power came back on, and everything seemed to settle back into place. That night, Asha went to bed. She shared a room with her brother. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No signs of distress. No indication that anything was about to change. But sometime after midnight, something did change. Around 2:30 in the morning, Asha's father reportedly checked on the children. Everything seemed fine. They were asleep, safe in their room. But by around 6:30 a.m., everything was different. Asha was gone. At first, it didn't make sense. Children don't just disappear from their homes, especially not without making noise, without waking anyone, without leaving any clear signs behind. But as her family began searching, it became clear that she wasn't in the house. And that's when panic set in. Authorities were contacted. Search efforts began. And very quickly, something even more unusual came to light. Because this wasn't just a disappearance. There were reports of sightings. Multiple people later came forward saying they had seen a young girl walking along Highway 18 in the early hours of that same morning, alone. It was still dark outside, cold, unfamiliar territory, and yet she was walking. One of the witnesses described seeing a small figure on the side of the road. At first, they thought it might be someone older, but as they got closer, they realized it was a child. Another driver also reported seeing her. Concerned, they even turned their vehicle around. But when they approached, the girl ran off into the woods. That detail changed everything because it suggested something very specific. She wasn't being chased. She wasn't calling for help. She was avoiding people. And that raised a question that still hasn't been answered. Why would a 9-year-old child leave home in the middle of the night and run away from someone trying to help? As search teams began combing the area, they focused on the locations where she had reportedly been seen. And then they found something. Near the roadside, in a shed not far from where she was last spotted, investigators discovered items that were believed to be connected to Asha. Candy wrappers, a pencil, personal belongings. These were small details, but they confirmed something critical. She had been there, which meant she had made it at least that far. But what happened after that remained completely unknown. There were no clear footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, no immediate evidence pointing to what happened next, just a trail that suddenly stopped. And that's what made this case different. Because from the very beginning, it didn't follow the patterns people expected. There was no forced entry, no obvious suspect, no clear explanation. Just a young girl who left her home in the middle of the night and vanished. At this point, the case had already taken a direction that didn't make sense. A young child leaving home in the middle of the night, walking along a highway, avoiding help. It didn't fit any clear pattern. So investigators began looking deeper into the details of Asha Degree's life. They started with her home, her family, her routine, because in cases involving children, one of the first steps is to understand the environment they were in. And what investigators found was stability. Asha lived with her parents and her brother. There were no immediate signs of conflict in the home, no reports of abuse, no indication that she was trying to escape something. Her family described her as a quiet, well-behaved child, someone who followed rules, someone who was not known to take risks, which made her actions that night even more confusing, because everything about her personality suggested the opposite. She was also known to be afraid of the dark, and yet she left her home before dawn, walked into the darkness, and continued moving forward. That contradiction became one of the central mysteries of the case. Investigators then looked at her school life, her friendships, her recent activities. Again, nothing stood out. There were no known conflicts, no signs that she had planned to run away, no indication that she was meeting someone, which led to another important question. If she didn't leave because of something happening at home, and she didn't leave because of something happening at school, then why did she leave at all? As the investigation continued, search teams expanded their efforts. They combed through wooded areas. They followed the path where she had last been seen. And then, months later, something significant was found. Over a year after her disappearance, construction workers made a discovery. Buried in the ground was a backpack. The backpack was later identified as belonging to Asha Degree. This wasn't just any discovery. It was one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Because of how it was found, the backpack had been wrapped in plastic bags and then buried. That detail suggested something very specific. This was not random. It was intentional. Someone had taken the time to conceal it, and that changed the direction of the investigation. Because up until that point, there had been a possibility, however unlikely, that Asha had simply wandered off. But the condition of the backpack suggested outside involvement. It suggested that someone else had been there. Inside the backpack were items that raised even more questions. Among them were belongings that were not originally hers, including a book that did not belong to her family. Investigators began trying to trace where these items came from, because in cases like this, even the smallest detail can lead to something larger. But despite these efforts, answers were limited. The location where the backpack was found was also significant. It wasn't along the same path where she had last been seen. It was miles away, which meant one thing. At some point after she was last seen walking, something happened that moved her and her belongings away from that area. And that's where the mystery deepened even further. Because now, there was evidence suggesting that she left on her own. She was seen walking. She reached a certain point. And then something changed. But what that something was remained unknown. Investigators explored multiple possibilities. Could someone have approached her? Could she have trusted the wrong person? Could she have been lured away? Each possibility came with its own set of questions. But none of them provided a complete answer. And that's what made this case so difficult. Because there wasn't just one mystery. There were several. Why did she leave? What happened after she was last seen? And who was responsible for what came next? As time passed, the case remained open. Leads came in. Tips were investigated. But none led to a definitive conclusion. And despite the discovery of the backpack, despite the sightings, despite the attention the case received, the answers people were looking for were still missing, which left investigators and the public with a story that felt incomplete, a timeline that started clearly and then suddenly disappeared into uncertainty. And that's where things stood, a case with key pieces of evidence, but no clear resolution, a story with a beginning, but no confirmed ending. At this point, the case had reached a place that many investigations struggle with. There were clues, there were sightings, there was physical evidence, but none of it came together in a way that provided a clear answer. And that's what makes the story of Asha Degree so difficult to understand, because every piece of information seems to point in a different direction. So investigators and the public began looking at the possibilities. One of the earliest theories was that Asha left home voluntarily, and based on the sightings along the highway, that part appears to be true. But that only explains the beginning. It doesn't explain why she left, and it definitely doesn't explain what happened next. Another theory is that she may have been meeting someone she trusted, someone who convinced her to leave. This theory attempts to explain why she would leave in the middle of the night and why she didn't appear to be in distress when she was seen. But there's a problem. There's no confirmed evidence that she had arranged to meet anyone. No messages, no notes, no clear indication of communication, which leaves that theory unproven. Then there's the possibility that she encountered someone after she left, someone who took advantage of the situation. This theory aligns with the discovery of the backpack because the way it was hidden suggests that another person was involved, someone who wanted to conceal evidence. But again, there's no confirmed identity, no clear suspect. And that's what makes this case so challenging, because even the strongest theories rely on assumptions. And in an investigation, assumptions aren't enough. They need evidence. Over the years, there have been developments. Investigators have revisited the case multiple times. They've followed new leads, re-examined old evidence, and continued to ask the same fundamental questions. In 2015, authorities released information about a vehicle of interest, a green car that may have been in the area around the time Asha was last seen. This detail sparked renewed attention because it suggested that someone may have been present during those early morning hours. But even with that lead, there was no confirmed connection that solved the case. And so the mystery remained. Years passed, but the case was never closed. Because cases like this don't just disappear. They stay open. They stay active. They stay in the minds of investigators who continue searching for answers. And in recent years, there have been renewed efforts to bring attention back to the case. Because sometimes new information comes from unexpected places. A detail someone didn't think was important. A memory that resurfaces. A connection that wasn't seen before. And in a case like this, any new piece of information could matter. But beyond the investigation, there's something else that keeps people connected to this story. It's not just the mystery. It's the question at the center of it all. Why? Why would a child leave home in the middle of the night? Why did she walk alone into the darkness? And why has no one been able to fully explain what happened after that? These are the questions that stay with people because they challenge assumptions. They don't follow a clear pattern, and they don't have easy answers, which is why this case continues to be discussed, not just because of what is known, but because of what isn't. As of today, the disappearance of Asha Degree remains unsolved, but it is not forgotten. And until there are answers, it remains a story that people continue to follow, a story that continues to raise questions, and a story that reminds us that sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones that begin in the most ordinary way. If you've made it this far, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened that night? And if you're interested in more true crime stories, both solved and unsolved, check out the other videos on this channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.